Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday to you. I am so very pleased that you have made the decision to be with me this morning yet one more time. If this is your first time, welcome. I would love for you to stick around and to become a part of this virtual community. Yesterday, we began to talk about different ways to lower your anxiety. And I want to begin by saying that lowering your anxiety is not an all of a sudden thing, long term. There are some things you can do that in the moment can help, but what helps to reduce your anxiety on a long term basis is by practice, practice, practice. We ended last week talking about deep breathing. Deep breathing always helps to slow down your anxiety. It helps you to get centered. Yesterday, we kind of talked about some other things that you can do to help to lower your anxiety. Today, what I want to do is talk about, and this is from a conversation that I had yesterday about triggers. Now, for those who have sustained traumas, and most people have in some shape, form, or fashion, there are certain things that they may find triggering. Sometimes it's the smell of something. Sometimes it's being able to see something. Sometimes it's a song. For example, you may have been in a really, really rough relationship or a relationship that ended that left you really, really bereft, that left you really sad, that left you really broken. And you have done the work and you have really begun to heal, but then you hear that song. You hear that song that reminds you of him or her in a particular situation, and all of a sudden you become triggered. So what do we do with triggers? As I've said in earlier videos, I've worked for a number of years with combat veterans, and for some of them, maybe a trigger is a smell. If you served in the Middle East, there's a lot of burn pits. So the smell of rubber burning, the smell of oil may be a trigger for you. Everyone may have their triggers. I remember there's a particular place in DC that when I drive past it, it used to be very triggering for me because it reminded me of something that had happened when I was in high school, where I had allowed myself to be taken advantage of. And I say it in that way particularly because I allowed it to happen. I could not figure out, I didn't go into it knowing it was going to happen, but when it began to happen, I could not figure out how to make it stop. And there may have been things I could do, but I think the allowed piece is because I knew this person's character. This was not someone who I was unfamiliar with. And so by even going off with this person was me in some sense allowing it, opening the door for more problematic behavior. And for a long time when I would drive past this particular area of town, I would get triggered. I became that young 15-year-old girl who felt that she was very vulnerable and had absolutely no power. So what I would begin to do is I would take a different route when I had to drive home from that particular area. I would avoid the area. But what I decided was, you know what? I'm going to expose myself to this particular area until it no longer affects me. And that's something called prolonged exposure, where we know what the trigger is and we intentionally expose ourselves to it repeatedly, because trust and believe, if you do that, if you expose yourself to the thing that triggers you repeatedly, your response to it will lessen and lessen and lessen until you get to the place of what they call habituation, where it no longer bothers you. So I'm here to report I can drive by that part of town, I can see those buildings, and I no longer have a response to it. But it took time. It took time. Your trigger may be, for some people who have been traumatized, they don't do crowds. They don't like going to the mall. They don't like to go to any space where there are numbers of people because they fear for their safety. They don't want to go to places where they're not sure, how can I leave if something jumps off? And so one of the things we suggest is not necessarily going to the mall at the height of rush, height of the shopping spree. But what we may suggest is, well, since we have social distances, this may not be the best example, but pre-social distancing days, we might suggest that you go to the mall specifically to buy one thing that you don't have to shop around for. Most malls have a drugstore in it. So to make it a point to go to the mall, to go to a particular store, but the trick is to go when the mall first opens, when there's very few people in there. And yes, you're going to experience anxiety. Yes, your heart's going to begin to race. Yes, your palms may begin to sweat because you're like, okay, if I go in there, even though there's not that many people in there, what could possibly happen? But the more that you practice, the more that you do it, you begin to realize, I'm able to do that. And so that's what I want us to kind of consider today is, I guess the first step is identifying what are our triggers. Again, a trigger could be a smell. It could be a song. It could be a person. It could be a place. It could be an image. Anything that reminds you of when you were very vulnerable. For me, it was a building. But for the first step is to identify what are your triggers. That's all I want you to do, and you don't have to comment, but just identify what are your triggers, what sets you off, okay? For some people, again, I want to go back to, it could be a person. It could be someone who you are challenged in your relationship with them, and you may even go so far as to say, I really don't like that person at all and prefer to never be in their presence. And then lo and behold, you see them and you have become triggered. Lo and behold, your whole sense of peace and serenity is gone and you have become triggered. And so again, we will talk some more tomorrow about what to do when you're triggered. But right now, I just want you to focus on what are your triggers and to rest and believe and to take hope in the fact that triggers can be addressed. But first, we need to know what they are. I invite you, I pray that you will have a wonderful Thursday. It's cloudy here. My prayers are with those across the Midwest who have been experiencing really bad weather and the folks on the West Coast who had an earthquake. There's all kinds of things happening. So my prayer is that even as things are happening outside of ourselves, that we will be very mindful and intentional about creating space internally and creating space and peace within on purpose. Have a wonderful day. Love you all. Bye-bye.